The bustling lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel in downtown Miami was alive with the usual mix of tourists and business travelers on a warm summer evening. Among them stood the towering figure of Shaquille O'Neal, the legendary basketball player known as much for his larger-than-life personality as his achievements on the court. Despite his celebrity status, Shaq preferred to keep a low profile that evening, having just finished a long day of business meetings. As he waited for the valet to bring his car around, he noticed a young woman struggling with her luggage near the hotel entrance. She was visibly pregnant, probably in her third trimester, and was having difficulty managing her two heavy suitcases in the humid Florida heat. What caught Shaq's attention wasn't just her obvious discomfort, but the quiet dignity with which she tried to handle her situation, despite being clearly overwhelmed. The woman, who would later introduce herself as Mrs. Chen, had traveled from California for an important job interview scheduled for the next morning. Her flight had been delayed, and by the time she arrived at the hotel, she discovered there had been a mix-up with her reservation. The hotel was fully booked due to a major conference, and the exhausted mother-to-be was trying to figure out her next move. Shaq observed as she spoke with the front desk staff, her voice trembling slightly as she explained her situation. The staff appeared genuinely apologetic but seemed unable to help due to the lack of available rooms. Mrs. Chen's shoulders slumped as she received the news, one hand unconsciously cradling her pregnant belly while the other gripped her phone, presumably searching for alternative accommodations. Without hesitation, Shaq approached the front desk. His presence immediately drew attention, but his focus remained solely on helping the distressed woman. He spoke quietly with the hotel manager, his deep voice carrying a gentle authority that came not from his celebrity status, but from genuine concern for a fellow human being in need. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as a perfect example of humanity at its finest. Shaq, learning that Mrs. Chen had been promised a room through an online booking service, decided to take matters into his own hands. He had a suite reserved for the next few days for his business meetings, but he knew he could easily make other arrangements. The basketball legend turned to Mrs. Chen and introduced himself with his characteristic warm smile. He explained that he would like to offer her his suite, insisting that a good night's rest was crucial before her important interview. At first, Mrs. Chen was hesitant, barely able to process that this famous athlete was offering to help her in such a significant way. As the story unfolded in the hotel lobby, other guests watched in quiet amazement. This wasn't about a celebrity making a grand gesture for attention, there were no cameras around, no publicists orchestrating the moment. It was simply one person recognizing another's need and having the means and willingness to help. Shaq didn't just offer his room, he ensured that Mrs. Chen's luggage was properly taken care of and personally spoke with the hotel staff to make sure she would be comfortable. He shared his business manager's contact information with her in case she needed anything during her stay, and even arranged for a complimentary breakfast to be sent to her room the next morning. The most touching part of the evening came when Mrs. Chen, finally accepting the help, began to tear up while thanking him. Shaq simply shook his head and said, "My mama raised me right. She always said we're blessed to be a blessing to others." These words, spoken without pretense, revealed the true character of a man known to millions but understood deeply by few. As the night drew to a close, the hotel lobby returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of what had transpired lingered in the air. The hotel staff, who had witnessed the entire interaction, would later share how this act of kindness created a ripple effect, inspiring others to be more compassionate in their own daily interactions. The story might have ended there, known only to those who witnessed it, had it not been for a hotel guest who captured a brief moment of the interaction on their phone. Though the video didn't show the full extent of Shaq's generosity, it captured something equally valuable, the genuine human connection between two strangers, one in need and one in a position to help. The next morning, as Miami's skyline caught the first rays of sunlight, Mrs. Chen woke up in the luxurious suite, still processing the events of the previous night. The room service breakfast that Shaq had arranged arrived precisely at 7 a.m., a thoughtful spread that included pregnancy-friendly options and a handwritten note wishing her luck for the interview. What she didn't know was that Shaq's kindness had set off a chain of events that would touch many more lives than just her own. The hotel staff, inspired by what they had witnessed, had started their morning briefing by discussing ways they could go above and beyond for their guests. The front desk manager had already implemented a new protocol for handling booking mishaps, ensuring that no pregnant woman or person in need would ever be left stranded. The video clip of Shaq's interaction with Mrs. Chen had started circulating on social media. Unlike many viral videos that focused on celebrity encounters, this one captured something different, a genuine moment of human connection. The person who recorded it had respected the privacy of the situation, only sharing a brief snippet that showed Shaq's gentle demeanor and Mrs. Chen's grateful tears. Meanwhile, Shaq had spent the night at a different hotel, but his mind kept returning to the previous evening. He hadn't done it for attention or praise. In fact, he had specifically asked the hotel staff to keep the matter private. For him, it was simply about being there for someone who needed help, just as others had been there for him during his journey from a struggling young athlete to an NBA legend. As Mrs. Chen prepared for her interview, she found herself feeling surprisingly calm. The comfortable night's rest had done wonders for her confidence, but it was more than that. The kindness she had experienced had reminded her of something important, that even in our most vulnerable moments, humanity's capacity for compassion can change everything. Her interview was for a position at a non-profit organization that helped underprivileged children access sports and education programs. As she sat across from the interview panel, she shared not only her professional qualifications but also, when asked about a recent experience that had impacted her, the story of what had happened the night before. The interviewers were moved not just by Shaq's actions, but by how the experience had affected Mrs. Chen. She spoke about how it had reinforced her belief in the organization's mission, that sports figures could be powerful role models not just through their athletic achievements, but through their actions off the court or field. Back at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the story had begun to spread among the guests and staff in whispered conversations. A wealthy businessman who overheard the tale quietly paid for another guest's stay when he learned they were struggling with the cost. A group of conference attendees started a small fund to help the hotel staff provide assistance to guests in similar situations in the future. The hotel's general manager received several calls from media outlets wanting to cover the story, but following Shaq's wishes, they kept the details private. This didn't stop people from sharing their own experiences with Shaq's generosity, though. Stories began emerging of similar acts of kindness he had performed over the years, always without fanfare or publicity. One hotel employee, a young man working his way through college, shared how watching the interaction had changed his perspective. It wasn't about the money or the fame, he told his colleagues during their break. It was about seeing someone in need and having the courage to step up. That's something any of us can do, in our own way. Mrs. Chen's interview ended on a high note, with the panel clearly impressed by her experience and qualifications. As she left the building, she noticed a pregnant woman struggling with heavy shopping bags at a bus stop. Without hesitation, she offered to help, continuing the chain of kindness that Shaq had started. The impact of that evening continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. The hotel's parent company, inspired by the incident, began developing a program to provide emergency accommodation for pregnant women and families in crisis. They named it the Quiet Impact Initiative, reflecting how small acts of kindness, done without expectation of recognition, could create lasting change. That afternoon, when Shaq returned to the hotel to collect some belongings he had left in the suite, he was met with warm smiles from the staff. No one mentioned the previous night directly, respecting his privacy, but there was a palpable sense of gratitude in the air. The front desk clerk simply handed him his items with a note that read, "Thank you for reminding us what true hospitality means." A week after the incident at the Grand Plaza Hotel, Mrs. Chen received the news she had been hoping for: she got the job. The nonprofit organization had been particularly impressed by her genuine passion for helping others, something that shone through as she shared her recent experience. They saw in her someone who truly understood the impact that simple acts of kindness could have on a community. The short video clip that had captured Shaq's act of kindness had taken on a life of its own across social media platforms. Unlike typical viral content that faded quickly, this story seemed to resonate deeply with people around the world. What made it special wasn't just Shaq's celebrity status, it was the genuine, unscripted nature of his compassion that touched hearts. Comments poured in from people sharing their own encounters with unexpected kindness. A truck driver in Texas wrote about how he'd been inspired to start keeping extra water and snacks in his vehicle to help stranded motorists. A teacher in Chicago described how she'd begun a kindness journal with her students, documenting small acts of compassion they witnessed or performed each day. Meanwhile, Shaq had been quietly going about his business, unaware of how far the ripples of his actions had spread. During a business meeting at another hotel, he noticed the staff treating him differently, not with the usual awe reserved for celebrities, but with a warmth that spoke of genuine respect. One staff member quietly shared how her pregnant daughter had been helped by a stranger at a grocery store, inspired by hearing about Shaq's actions. The Grand Plaza Hotel had seen subtle but significant changes in the weeks following that evening. The front desk staff had created an unofficial support system for guests in difficult situations. They pooled their own resources to keep a few rooms available for emergencies, inspired by Shaq's example of putting humanity before profit. Mrs. Chen, now settling into her new role at the nonprofit, found herself becoming an unexpected advocate for compassion in the workplace. Her first project involved creating a mentorship program that paired successful athletes with struggling students. She often thought about how a single act of kindness had not only helped her in a moment of need but had also shaped her entire approach to her new career. The story took an interesting turn when a local Miami youth basketball program reported a surprise visit from Shaq. He hadn't come to make a speech or pose for photos. Instead, he spent hours talking with young players about life beyond basketball. He shared stories about his mother's influence on his character and the importance of seeing people, really seeing them, when they're in need. One of the young athletes, a quiet girl who had been struggling with confidence, later told her coach how Shaq had noticed her hanging back during practice. He had taken a moment to share with her how his own mother had taught him that true strength wasn't about being the biggest or strongest, but about having the courage to help others, even when no one was watching. The hotel's Quiet Impact initiative had begun to take shape, with other hotels in the chain adopting similar programs. They created a simple but effective system for identifying and helping guests in difficult situations, particularly expecting mothers and families facing emergencies. The program wasn't publicized, keeping true to the spirit of Shaq's original act, but its impact was felt by countless grateful travelers. Social media continued to buzz with the story, but in an unusually positive way. Instead of the typical celebrity gossip, people were sharing their own Shaq-inspired moments of kindness. A trending hashtag emerged, #QuietImpact, celebrating acts of kindness done without expectation of recognition or reward. Back in California, Mrs. Chen's pregnancy was progressing well, and her new workplace had embraced her with open arms. She kept the handwritten note from her breakfast at the Grand Plaza Hotel, not as a celebrity souvenir, but as a reminder of how a moment of kindness could change someone's entire trajectory. The story reached new heights when a group of NBA players, inspired by their former colleagues' actions, began a quiet movement of their own. They started showing up unannounced at hospitals, schools, and community centers, not for publicity, but to help where they could. One player, who wished to remain anonymous, covered medical bills for an entire pediatric ward, saying simply, "Shaq showed us what it really means to be a star." As autumn approached Miami, the Grand Plaza Hotel had become known among industry insiders as a place where hospitality meant more than just good service. The manager noticed that their staff turnover had dropped significantly. People wanted to work in an environment where they were encouraged to care, really care about their guests. The young hotel employee who had witnessed the original incident had started taking business classes at his college, inspired by seeing how corporate policy could be shaped by compassion. His class project on human-centered business models used the hotel's new initiative as a case study, earning him not just top marks but also the attention of several companies interested in similar programs. As winter approached, the impact of that warm Miami evening continued to grow in unexpected ways. The youth basketball program where Shaq had made his surprise visit had undergone a remarkable transformation. The quiet girl he had spoken to had blossomed into a natural leader, starting a peer mentoring program that paired experienced players with newcomers, ensuring no one felt left out or overlooked. The program had caught the attention of community leaders across the country. What made it special wasn't just its focus on basketball skills, but its emphasis on character development. The coaches had incorporated regular discussions about kindness and community service into their training sessions, helping young athletes understand that their influence extended far beyond the court. Mrs. Chen's nonprofit organization had exceeded all expectations in its outreach efforts. Her personal experience with Shaq's kindness had influenced their approach to community engagement. Instead of focusing solely on large, public initiatives, they developed a network of small, personal connections that created lasting impact. They called it the one person at a time approach, believing that meaningful change often started with individual acts of compassion. The Grand Plaza Hotel had become something of a quiet legend in the hospitality industry. Other hotels sent their staff for informal observations, trying to understand how the property had achieved such high guest satisfaction ratings while maintaining exceptional employee morale. The answer, they discovered, couldn't be found in any manual or training program. It was in the culture of genuine care that had taken root that evening. One particularly touching story emerged from the hotel's kitchen staff. The head chef, inspired by the ongoing wave of kindness, had started a program to train and hire young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. He remembered how someone had given him a chance when he was starting out, and Shaq's actions had reminded him of the importance of passing that opportunity forward. The hotel's night manager shared a story that perfectly captured the spirit of what had become known as the Shaq effect. Late one evening, a teenage boy had wandered into the lobby, clearly distressed. Instead of asking him to leave, the staff discovered he had run away from home after a family argument. They provided him with a safe space, contacted his worried parents, and helped facilitate a reunion that ended in tears of relief and reconciliation. Back in California, Mrs. Chen's influence at her workplace had led to an innovative new program. They created a mobile app that connected young athletes with mentors, resources, and emergency assistance when needed. The app's most popular feature was its Kind Actions tracker, which encouraged users to log their acts of kindness, creating a ripple effect of positive actions throughout their communities. The story reached a new dimension when a documentary filmmaker approached Shaq about creating a short film about the impact of small acts of kindness. True to his character, Shaq declined to be the focus of the film, instead suggesting they spotlight the countless ordinary people who had been inspired to make a difference in their own ways. The filmmaker took this suggestion to heart, traveling across the country to collect stories of how one act of kindness had multiplied into thousands. They found a restaurant owner in Seattle who had started a Pay It Forward meal program after hearing about Shaq's hotel gesture. A retired teacher in Florida had created a community garden where neighbors could grow and share fresh produce, fostering connections among people who had previously been strangers. The young hotel employee who had witnessed the original incident had completed his business degree and was now working on implementing similar initiatives in other hotels. His thesis on the economics of kindness had challenged traditional business models, showing how compassion-based policies could lead to both social and financial success. Mrs. Chen's pregnancy had progressed well, and she often reflected on how different things might have been if Shaq hadn't stepped in that evening. Her baby shower, organized by her new colleagues, turned into an impromptu donation drive for expectant mothers in need, inspired by her story of receiving help when she needed it most. The hotel's Quiet Impact initiative had evolved into a comprehensive program that other businesses were eager to adopt. It wasn't just about helping people in crisis, it was about creating an environment where everyone felt seen and valued. The program had expanded to include training for staff on recognizing signs of distress, cultural sensitivity, and the importance of small gestures in creating meaningful connections. Social media continued to play a role in spreading the message, but in a way that emphasized substance over spectacle. People shared their stories not for likes or follows, but to inspire others and create genuine connections. The #QuietImpact hashtag had become a symbol of authentic kindness, with people using it to find and support others in their communities who needed help. One particularly moving post came from a former NBA player who shared how Shaq had privately helped him during a difficult period in his career. He hadn't told anyone about it for years, but seeing the impact of the hotel incident had inspired him to share his story, showing that Shaq's kindness wasn't a one-time event but a consistent part of his character. Spring arrived in California with a special gift. Mrs. Chen welcomed her baby daughter into the world. The delivery room at the local hospital had an unexpected connection to the events that had unfolded months ago in Miami. One of the nurses, having heard about the hotel incident, had initiated a program to provide extra support for pregnant women who arrived at the hospital alone or in difficult circumstances. The documentary project about the Shaq effect had taken an interesting turn. Instead of following a traditional format, the filmmaker had decided to create a series of interconnected stories, each showing how one act of kindness had led to another. The project had attracted attention from unexpected quarters, with people from all walks of life eager to share their experiences of how the movement had touched their lives. One particularly moving segment featured the Grand Plaza Hotel's transformation. The security guard who had been on duty the night of Shaq's act of kindness shared how the atmosphere of the entire building had changed. "It's like the walls absorbed that kindness," he explained, "and now they radiate it back to everyone who walks through these doors." He described how even the most stressed-out travelers seemed to soften when they encountered the genuine warmth of the staff. The hotel's initiative had sparked a revolution in the hospitality industry. A major hotel chain had reached out to the Grand Plaza's management, hoping to understand how they could implement similar programs across their properties. What they discovered was that it wasn't about grand gestures or expensive programs, it was about creating an environment where both staff and guests felt empowered to help others. Back at Mrs. Chen's nonprofit organization, the impact continued to grow. They had launched a scholarship program named The Ripple Effect, providing educational opportunities for young athletes who demonstrated exceptional character and commitment to their communities. The first recipient was a high school basketball player who had started a food delivery service for elderly neighbors, inspired by stories she had heard about the #QuietImpact movement. The young hotel employee who had witnessed the original incident had become a sought-after speaker at business conferences. However, he always began his presentations by emphasizing that the real power lay not in grand strategies but in simple, human moments of connection. He shared how he had seen countless examples of guests helping other guests, creating a community of kindness that extended far beyond the hotel's walls. Shaq himself had maintained his characteristic humility throughout the growing movement. When asked about it during a business conference, he deflected attention from his role and instead highlighted the actions of others. He shared a story about a janitor at the conference center who had used his break time to help an elderly attendee find her way around the massive building. "That's what it's all about," Shaq said, "seeing someone in need and doing what you can to help, no matter who you are." The documentary team captured an unexpected moment when they visited Mrs. Chen's workplace. A young athlete in their program had been struggling with homelessness, keeping it secret from everyone. A staff member, remembering the hotel incident, had noticed signs of distress and reached out. The organization had mobilized to help, connecting the young person with housing assistance and support services, all while maintaining their dignity and privacy. The Grand Plaza Hotel's night shift had developed their own unique approach to continuing the legacy. They kept a journal, passed between shifts, documenting small acts of kindness they witnessed or performed. These weren't dramatic rescues or grand gestures, they were simple moments like helping a tired parent with luggage, offering a warm drink to someone who seemed down, or listening to a lonely traveler's story. The hotel's kitchen staff had expanded their training program, now working with 5 other hotels to create opportunities for disadvantaged youth. The head chef, speaking to the documentary crew, shared how one of his first trainees had already opened their own small catering business and was now mentoring others. "It's like a garden," he explained, "you plant one seed of kindness, and it grows into an entire ecosystem of support." Mrs. Chen's daughter's birth had coincided with the launch of a new initiative at her organization. They had created a parent-athlete support network, recognizing that many young athletes came from families facing various challenges. The program provided resources, mentorship, and emergency assistance, all inspired by the understanding that sometimes people just need someone to see them and offer help. The #Quiet Impact movement had evolved beyond social media into real-world action networks. People began organizing informal support groups in their communities, looking for ways to help others without seeking recognition. A group of retired teachers had started a free tutoring program, business owners offered job training to struggling parents, and healthcare workers volunteered their time at community clinics. The documentary captured these stories with a gentle touch, showing how authentic kindness naturally inspired others to action. They found that people were most moved not by dramatic gestures but by the simple, everyday moments of human connection, a shared smile, a helping hand, a moment of understanding. One of the most powerful segments featured interviews with hotel guests who had experienced the ripple effects of that initial act of kindness. A businessman described how, after being helped by the hotel staff during a personal crisis, he had completely changed his company's policies to be more supportive of employees facing family emergencies. "It made me realize," he said, "that success isn't just about profits, it's about creating a culture of care." As summer returned to Miami, marking a year since that fateful evening at the Grand Plaza Hotel, the documentary about the Shaq effect was nearing completion. The filmmaker had collected hundreds of hours of footage, each frame capturing the authentic spirit of kindness that had spread from one simple act. The challenge wasn't finding stories to tell, it was choosing which ones to feature among the countless examples of how people had been inspired to help others. The documentary's rough cut had been screened for a small audience of those involved in the original story. Mrs. Chen, who had traveled from California with her 3-month-old daughter, sat in the front row. Her baby, peaceful throughout the screening, seemed to embody the hope that the film represented, the next generation that would grow up in a world where kindness was celebrated and normalized. The Grand Plaza Hotel had become a case study in how business and compassion could coexist and thrive together. Their occupancy rates had actually increased, not through marketing or promotions, but through word of mouth from guests who had experienced their unique approach to hospitality. The hotel had started offering internships to business students who wanted to learn about their model of conscious capitalism. One touching scene in the documentary featured a reunion at the hotel. The young pregnant woman who had been helped by a guest inspired by Shaq's actions had returned with her baby to thank the staff. She met with the businessman who had covered her room cost, leading to an emotional moment where she shared how that one night of safe rest had changed the trajectory of her pregnancy and early motherhood. The hotel's night staff journal had grown into 3 volumes, filled with stories that ranged from simple acts of kindness to life-changing interventions. The management had started a tradition of reading selected entries during staff meetings, not as a way to praise individuals, but to remind everyone of the power they had to make a difference in guests' lives. Mrs. Chen's nonprofit organization had expanded its reach beyond sports programs. They had launched a mentorship network that connected successful professionals with young people facing challenges. The unique aspect of their program was its emphasis on small, personal connections rather than large-scale networking events. They believed, as Shaq had demonstrated, that real change happened one person at a time. The documentary team captured a powerful moment when they interviewed the hotel's housekeeping staff. One housekeeper shared how she had found a handwritten note from a guest contemplating self-harm. Instead of simply reporting it, she had worked with the hotel's new crisis response team to ensure the guest received immediate support and professional help. Months later, the guest returned to thank her, saying that her compassion had given them hope during their darkest moment. The film also explored how the movement had influenced the business world beyond the hospitality industry. Companies began incorporating kindness metrics into their performance evaluations, measuring not just productivity and profits, but also how employees supported each other and their communities. A major corporation had even created a Chief Compassion Officer position, inspired by the success of the Grand Plaza's approach. Shaq's involvement in the documentary remained minimal, true to his desire to keep the focus on the everyday heroes who had emerged. However, he did agree to a brief interview where he shared stories about his mother's influence on his character. "She taught me that true strength isn't about how much you can lift," he said, "but about how many people you can lift up." The young hotel employee who had witnessed the original incident had completed his business degree and was now implementing similar programs in hotels across the country. His approach focused on training staff to recognize opportunities for kindness and empowering them to act without fear of breaking protocol. "Rules are important," he would say in training sessions, "but humanity should always come first." Mrs. Chen's daughter had become a symbol of hope for her organization. Staff members took turns watching the baby during meetings, creating a family-like atmosphere that reflected their broader mission of supporting whole communities, not just individual athletes. The baby's presence reminded everyone of how a single act of kindness had created this ripple effect of positive change. The documentary featured a powerful segment on how the movement had influenced healthcare. Inspired by the hotel's approach, several hospitals had revised their protocols to better support patients' emotional needs. A nurse who had heard about the hotel incident had started a program where staff would take turns sitting with patients who had no visitors, proving that medical care went beyond just physical treatment. As the film neared its final edit, the production team struggled with how to end such a far-reaching story. They finally decided to focus on a simple scene: a new employee at the Grand Plaza Hotel helping a tired traveler with their bags, unaware that they were being filmed. It was this everyday kindness, natural and unscripted, that best captured the spirit of what had begun with Shaq's simple decision to help someone in need. The documentary's impact was felt even before its official release. Preview screenings had led to spontaneous discussions about how communities could better support their vulnerable members. People left the theaters not just moved, but motivated to create change in their own spheres of influence. The documentary premiered on a warm evening in Miami, not at a glamorous theater, but in the Grand Plaza Hotel's renovated conference room. The space had been transformed into a comfortable screening venue, with the audience consisting mainly of people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effect of kindness that began there. Hotel staff, both current and former, sat alongside guests who had experienced the Shaq effect firsthand. Mrs. Chen attended with her now 6-month-old daughter, who had become something of a mascot for the kindness movement. During the screening, the baby remained surprisingly calm, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Several times throughout the film, people would glance at mother and child, seeing in them the living proof of how one act of kindness could change not just a life, but generations. The documentary structure was unique. Instead of following a traditional narrative, it wove together countless small stories, showing how each act of kindness had inspired others. The film opened with security camera footage from that fateful night, showing Shaq's initial interaction with Mrs. Chen. But rather than dwelling on the celebrity aspect, it quickly branched out to follow the countless ripples that had emerged from that moment. One of the most powerful segments featured interviews with hotel staff from around the country who had implemented their own versions of the Quiet Impact initiative. A night clerk in Seattle shared how she had helped a stranded family during a snowstorm, not just by finding them a room, but by organizing other guests to share extra warm clothing and supplies. This had led to the creation of an emergency supplies network among local hotels. The film captured the transformation of the business world's approach to corporate responsibility. Companies that had adopted the kindness metrics reported unexpected benefits, improved employee retention, increased customer loyalty, and even better financial performance. The documentary showed how this wasn't just feel-good corporate policy, it was a sustainable business model that proved compassion and success could go hand in hand. Healthcare facilities that had embraced the movement shared their stories. A small community hospital had created a kindness cart that traveled through the wards, offering simple comforts to patients and families during difficult times. The idea had spread to other hospitals, with staff reporting that these small gestures often had a bigger impact on patient well-being than they had anticipated. The youth basketball program where Shaq had made his surprise visit had evolved into a comprehensive community support center. The documentary showed how the quiet girl he had encouraged was now running peer support groups, helping other young athletes build confidence both on and off the court. Her story highlighted how kindness could transform not just the recipient, but empower them to become agents of change themselves. Mrs. Chen's nonprofit organization had become a model for others in the sector. The documentary featured their innovative approach to community outreach, showing how they had moved beyond traditional programs to create a network of support that touched every aspect of their participants' lives. Their one person at a time approach had been adopted by organizations across the country. The film didn't shy away from challenging moments. It showed how the hotel staff dealt with difficult situations, not by following rigid protocols, but by approaching each case with empathy and creativity. The documentary captured real conversations between staff members as they problem-solved complex situations, demonstrating that kindness wasn't always easy but was always worth the effort. One particularly moving segment focused on the ripple effects in education. Teachers who had heard about the movement had started implementing kindness corners in their classrooms, safe spaces where students could take breaks, find support, or offer help to others. The documentary showed how these simple changes had led to improved academic performance and reduced behavioral issues. The Grand Plaza Hotel's Journal Project had inspired a nationwide initiative called Chronicles of Kindness, where businesses and organizations documented and shared their experiences of compassion in action. The documentary showed how these stories were being used in training programs, helping people understand that kindness wasn't just a nice idea but a practical approach to solving real-world problems. Throughout the film, Shaq's presence was felt but never overshadowed the larger message. His brief appearances served to emphasize that true influence comes not from celebrity status but from genuine human connection. The documentary showed how his example had inspired other public figures to engage in authentic, unpublicized acts of kindness. The film's impact extended beyond its viewing audience. During the premiere, social media was flooded with people sharing their own stories of kindness, inspired by the documentary's message. The hashtag Quiet Impact trended again, but this time with a focus on taking action rather than just sharing stories. As the credits rolled at the premiere, there wasn't the usual rush to leave. Instead, people stayed in their seats, sharing stories and making connections. The hotel staff had prepared refreshments, and the conference room became a space for spontaneous community building, just as the lobby had been that night a year ago. In the months following the documentary's premiere, its message continued to resonate in ways that surprised even its creators. The film had been picked up by streaming platforms, but its real impact wasn't measured in viewing numbers. It was evident in the quiet revolution of kindness that continued to spread across communities worldwide. Mrs. Chen's daughter celebrated her first birthday at a community center built by her nonprofit organization. The celebration turned into an impromptu community gathering, with local families bringing food to share and children playing basketball on the newly constructed court. The center had become more than just a sports facility, it was a hub for the kind of everyday kindness that the documentary had celebrated. The Grand Plaza Hotel had maintained its special atmosphere, but with an important evolution. Rather than being known as the place where Shaq once showed kindness, it had become a place where kindness was simply part of its DNA. The staff had developed a subtle way of identifying guests who might need extra support, not through any formal system, but through genuine human connection and attention. A touching moment occurred when a former hotel guest, who had been helped during a difficult time, returned as a successful business owner. She had started a company that specialized in creating workplace wellness programs, inspired by her experience at the Grand Plaza. During her visit, she announced a partnership with the hotel to create internship opportunities for young people from challenging backgrounds. The documentary's impact on the healthcare sector had led to a nationwide initiative called Compassion Standards, which recognized that emotional support was as crucial to patient care as medical treatment. Hospitals reported improved recovery rates and patient satisfaction, proving that kindness wasn't just good for the soul, it was good for health outcomes too. Shaq's influence continued in his characteristically quiet way. He had started making unannounced visits to community centers and schools, not for publicity, but to connect with young people who needed encouragement. One such visit to a struggling inner-city school had resulted in a complete transformation of the school's culture, with students and teachers working together to create a more supportive environment. The youth basketball program had expanded beyond sports, becoming a model for community transformation. The quiet girl who had found her voice through Shaq's encouragement was now in college, studying social work while continuing to mentor younger players. She had started a program called Beyond the Court, which helped athletes understand that their greatest victories could come from helping others. Mrs. Chen's nonprofit had developed a unique approach to measuring success. Instead of focusing solely on traditional metrics like participation numbers or fundraising goals, they tracked what they called kindness connections, the ways in which their programs fostered meaningful relationships and community support. This innovative approach had caught the attention of researchers studying the social impact of nonprofit organizations. The hotel industry had undergone a subtle but significant shift. The Quiet Impact Initiative had evolved into a movement that emphasized human connection over traditional customer service metrics. Hotels across the country had begun training their staff not just in professional skills, but in emotional intelligence and community awareness. The documentary's director had received numerous offers to create similar films for other organizations, but instead chose to start a mentorship program for young filmmakers interested in telling stories of community impact. They believed that the next generation of storytellers needed to understand how to capture authentic moments of human connection. Technology had played an unexpected role in spreading the movement. A group of software developers, inspired by the documentary, had created an app that helped connect people in need with those who could offer assistance. Unlike traditional social media, the app emphasized privacy and dignity, allowing people to help others without seeking recognition. The Grand Plaza's night journal had been digitized and turned into a training resource for the hospitality industry, with entries carefully anonymized to protect privacy. These real-life stories of kindness in action had become valuable teaching tools, showing future hospitality workers that their role extended beyond service to genuine human care. As the movement continued to grow, it maintained its essential character, quiet, genuine, and focused on individual connections. The documentary had shown that the most powerful changes often started with simple acts of kindness, and this message continued to inspire people to look for opportunities to help others in their daily lives. The story had come full circle when a pregnant woman arrived at the Grand Plaza Hotel late one night, having lost her reservation at another hotel. Without fanfare or publicity, the staff quietly worked to ensure she had a comfortable place to stay. This time, it wasn't about creating another inspiring story, it was simply about doing what had become natural for them, showing kindness to someone in need. In the end, what had started as one basketball legend's act of kindness had grown into something much larger, yet somehow remained true to its original spirit. The documentary had captured not just a moment in time, but the beginning of a movement that continued to touch lives in countless quiet ways, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could create the biggest changes in the world.